Hey everyone, welcome back. This is going to start our second unit of the semester, moving beyond the Renaissance and seeing some of the legacy of the Renaissance and how this era establishes some standards in the visual arts and also in politics and economics that are going to have this far-reaching effect. And we're going to take a look at how these ideas that were started really in the Renaissance are going to really take root and influence the next several hundred years. Today I just wanted to go over just briefly an overview of the next era for the next unit, which is going to be roughly between 1600 and about 1860 or so, somewhere along those lines. This is the next unit that we're going to be taking a look at. One of the major legacies is that of religion, and we've already started seeing this begin with the Renaissance and the Reformation. But what we're going to see during the 1600 to 1800, roughly around a 250-year period, is there's going to be a tremendous amount of religious wars between the Catholics and the Protestants that are going to be waged in throughout Europe, and it's going to wreak havoc. But eventually, right, the Puritans, who are mainly Calvinists, are fleeing from religious persecution, find their way into the New World. And as the colonialists start developing their own country, they start suggesting that we need to avoid all of this religious persecution. And hopefully this new land won't be filled with religious conflict and wars. And so one of the main legacies of this era is the freedom of religion. Coming from the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. And so there's a lot that's really there within that First Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights, as the newly developed United States was suggesting what are some of the foundational principles. The first foundational principle was this idea of the freedom of religion and freedom to exercise one's religion. It's also, we're going to take a look at the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press are also going to be pivotal changes during this era as well. But one of the major changes is this freedom of religion. Another major change that we're going to see that started within the Renaissance and is going to pick up and be even further during this time is the legacy of the science and scientific advancements. We saw that a little bit with the Renaissance with Michelangelo and Leonardo starting to dissect cadavers in order to understand the body and the form. We saw a little bit with Galileo and his understanding of that we live in a heliocentric solar system rather than an Earth-centric solar system. But we're going to take that to the next level. Taking a look at Descartes, who comes out of this era, he says, if you would be a real seeker after truth, and that's really what scientists are seeking to understand. They're seeking to understand truth, which means freedom from religious tradition, religious ideas, right? Religious, whatever kind of customs they're there. What they're really seeking for is to understand nature, to study and understand how the world actually works. Not how we believe it to work, but how it actually works. So he says it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt as far as possible all things, which sounds kind of stark as members of the church to doubt all things. But what he's suggesting here is once you start to doubt everything, you start to really free your mind from the biases that you have. The biases how you see people, the biases how you see the world, and then that can get you closer to actually seeing truth, right? And so we need to remove biases if we're going to see clearly. Otherwise, how we interact with one another is going to be flawed. How we start to found our understanding of the world around us is going to be somewhat flawed. And so he then argues, in order to do this, once you start doubting everything, you need to say, okay, now what is truth? And so he develops a method for that, for uncovering truth. He says, divide each difficulty into as many parts as is feasible, and necessary to resolve it. And so what he's developing here is the scientific method, right? We need to break everything down to the parts to study each of them individually, and then we can develop some theories about them, then we can test the theories, and then measure the results. And then he says, each problem that I solve became a rule which served afterwards to solve other problems. And so once you develop a rule, once you know that rule is truth, then you can develop that rule to solve everything around it. And what he's suggesting here is that we can't simply use tradition, right? I'm reading a book currently about the 1918 pandemic. And one of the major advancements that happens in the 1800s is germ therapy. And what they start understanding is you can't just use the past methods of the Greeks, of Hippocrates or even Aristotle. What you need to understand is you need to understand how things actually work. And so they started looking at things underneath a microscope. And that microscope gave them the ability to understand that there's things that are working at the microscopic level in that within each person. And if we can understand how those things are being affected, we can then find cures for them. And so interestingly, it wasn't really until the 1900s that doctors, as they were trained within this scientific method, that they actually had a 4-year degree, and they actually had to see patients, right? Before this time, all you had to do was take 8 classes. You only had to pass 4 of them, and then once you passed those 4 classes, they gave you a degree. You never saw one single patient, and there was really the only certification that you had to keep up with was, seeing patients. And so there wasn't really any type of overall structure to that. And so what Descartes suggests here was kind of the foundational element that's going to lead to some of these scientific changes that we're still benefiting from today is we can't just believe that something is true. We need to actually study it. I wanted to show you one experiment. This is an experiment done by Galileo, and what Galileo argues is if you take something heavy like a bowling ball and something a little bit lighter like a book or a set of car keys, and you drop them off something like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they're going to fall at exactly the same rate, right? At the time, the people thought, well, that's kind of dumb. I mean, how wouldn't the heavier thing fall faster, right? But what he's suggesting is you can't just assume that heavier things fall faster. You have to actually study it out and test it to find the actual truth. And this is going to be a study where they're going to reenact that, but they're going to change it a little bit, and you'll see how they change this scientific study.
This is NASA's Space Power Facility near Cleveland, Ohio, and it is the world's biggest vacuum chamber. It's used to test spacecraft in the conditions of outer space, and it does that by pumping out the 30 tons of air in this chamber until there are about 2 grams left. And it's kind of got an eccentric construction, which is part of its history. It was built in the 1960s as a nuclear test facility to test nuclear propulsion systems, and that meant that they built it out of aluminium to make the radiation easier to deal with. Aluminium is not the best thing, the strongest material to build a vacuum chamber out of, so they built an outer concrete skin, which is part radiation shielding and part an external pressure vessel, so that this thing can take the force that's present on the outside when it's pumped out to the conditions of outer space. Galileo's experiment was simple. He took a heavy object and a light one and dropped them at the same time to see which fell fastest. Now in this case, the feathers fell to the ground at a slower rate than the bowling ball because of air resistance. So in order to see the true nature of gravity, we have to remove the air. It takes 3 hours to pump out the 800,000 cubic feet of air from the chamber.
We dropped 2 millitorr in the last 30 minutes.
But once it's complete, there's a near perfect vacuum inside.
6104 manual, 10% open. Station 1, go for drop. PCB 30-1, pressure setting at 240 psi. ER, go for drop.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Cameras on. 2, 1. Release.
Look at that.
They came down exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
Feathers don't move, nothing.
That's just brilliant. Isaac Newton would say that the ball and the feather fall because there's a force pulling them down, gravity. But Einstein imagined the scene very differently. The happiest thought of his life was this: the reason the bowling ball and the feather fall together is because they're not falling. They're standing still. There is no force acting on them at all. He reasoned that if you couldn't see the background, there'd be no way of knowing that the ball and the feathers were being accelerated towards the earth. So he concluded they weren't.
So we'd see within this scientific experiment that the feather and the bowling ball fall at the same rate is we can't just base our understanding on past assumptions. We can't just assume that because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west that the sun is actually moving, right? We actually need to remove tradition. We need to move our maybe religious understanding. We need this other space to be able to understand truth. Then once we do that, we can build on those building blocks. And so two of the major developments during this time was, number one, the freedom of religion, that people need to be able to practice religion how they choose. The other one is that we need a little bit of space. Science needs a little bit of space from religion to really understand, because if they don't have that freedom, then you have too much biases that are going to influence and cloud our understanding of truth. Another major legacy of this particular era is the development of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism. And what we see during this time is we see some major economic changes, where similar to what we saw during the Renaissance with the Medicis in Florence, you see the wealthy business people start coming to power, coming on the rise, and they start pushing for more freedom and more political advances. And we'll take a look at that in a subsequent lecture. But a couple of quotes to think about: all money is a matter of belief. And so this idea that we should be able to have the freedom, not just a religion, but the freedom to pursue our own desires. Before this, if your father was a carpenter, you were going to be a carpenter. If your father was a blacksmith, you were going to be a blacksmith. But what we see during this time is you're going to have the freedom to choose what you want to be. And we think of that today as kind of commonplace, or it's just a given. But it wasn't always the case, right? It wasn't always the case that people had the freedom to be able to choose their own career path. There were economic and political restrictions upon people that governed what they were going to do and how they were going to live. Here's another thought. The real tragedy of a person is the poverty of their aspirations. And so really what's keeping the poor down is this idea of not thinking above yourself.
28 years old. When I had children, my children were going to know who their father was.
Yeah.
Chris Gardner was doing his best.
We don't need two.
We don't need one.
Maybe next quarter.
It's possible. But his best
Wait!
wasn't enough.
Man, I got two questions for you. What do you do and how do you do it?
I'm a stockbroker.
Stockbroker. Oh. Hey, I'm gonna let you hang on to my car for the weekend, but I need it back for Monday. Feed the meter.
I need the rest. I can't wait anymore. I need you out of here in the morning.
You gotta trust me, all right?
I trust you.
Because I'm getting a better job.
Ooh, child.
Let me see if I can find you an application for our internship.
Did Mom leave because of me?
Mom left because of Mom, and you didn't have anything to do with that.
Ooh.
There's no salary. No, I was not aware of that. My circumstances have changed some.
Dad, where are we going?
I don't know.
Last year, we had an intern score on 90% on the written exam. He wasn't chosen. It's not a simple pass-fail.
You're not quitting on the shed, are you?
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
All right.
Jay says you're pretty determined.
Where are you going? Look that hospital! I'm in a competitive internship at Dean Witter.
He said you're smart.
This is impossible. I can do it.
No, you can't. No one can.
You're good, Papa.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period.
So we see with the pursuit of happiness is this idea that stems from this era, this idea that anyone could, through hard work, determination, their own skill set, ingenuity, be able to rise above their current circumstances. And so this becomes one of the legacies of this particular era, this idea of equality, right? When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth and separate an equal station to which the laws of nature and of God and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of the man's require that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And so what we see within this statement by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence is that people should have the freedom to choose their own political way as well, right? And so this idea of moving away, this idea of democracy, this idea that people should choose their own political leaders, which is a radical idea. And he continues here, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with a certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And so a couple ideas here is that everyone is created equal rather than there's some people that are better than others. This is suggesting that everyone is born inherently equal, politically speaking, not necessarily economically speaking, but at least politically speaking, that there should have equal justice under the law. And then the purpose of the government is to be able to secure these rights for the people. And the power that the government has is only given on behalf of the people, right? So the power that the people give the government, they can then take away as well, right? That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, should not perish from the earth. And so this idea that freedom should be a governing principle of people, of a society, of a community, of a political nation. So what we see is the movements, this idea of the fading away of oligarchies, this idea of feudalism and authoritarianism, where you have kings and queens that are ruling. You're going to see that's going to be completely obliterated for the most part and is replaced by representative democracies with the American Revolution and the French Revolution. What we're going to take a look at is how cultural movements of Baroque, Rococo, Neoclassical, and Classicism capture these changes in science, capture these changes in religion, capture these changes in the economic developments and the political developments. And so the legacy of the era, right, this idea of equality and democracy, is we don't necessarily focus so much on, Meghan and Harry to a certain extent, right, the royal family. Although we kind of get excited when they get married or something happens, for the most part, they don't really have a big influence on our day-to-day life. And so we're going to see these ideas that the royal family used to govern everything, that it used to be, the government used to be them, is going to change, is going to move away. We don't necessarily focus on this English hierarchy of dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts, or barons. What we focus more on is people's ability, people's potential. That should be the focus. And it really starts during this era of this 150 years.